Being the very first game in the series, there was a lot that God of War covered from a narrative point of view that would go on to prove instrumental to future developments. The origin of Kratos' binds to Ares, him murdering his own wife and daughter, how he came to be known as the Ghost of Sparta, these were all just a few of the pivotal moments from Kratos' past that were first shown in 2005's God of War. Seeing as we've already covered all the backstory the game talks about, and then some, we are going to spend relatively less time on those particular events than we would have had to otherwise. In Chains of Olympus, we saw a Kratos who was voluntarily but grudgingly bound to the service of the gods of Olympus. After 5 years in service to the gods, he proved himself to be a worthy champion. What with him rescuing Helios and his duel against the combined forces of Persephone, the Queen of the Underworld, and the Titan Atlas. God of War picks up 5 years later as Kratos nears the end of his servitude, with hopes that the Olympians will eventually grant him reprieve from his nightmares. As the game kicks off though, we find out that all has not gone well for the man known as the Ghost of Sparta. The opening moments of God of War show Kratos standing on the edge of a cliff on the Suicide Bluffs, the highest point in Greece, with one foot dangling over the edge, and a look of complete and utter defeat shadowing his face. He proclaims that the gods of Olympus have abandoned him, and believing death to be the only escape from his tortured existence, a desperate and hopeless Kratos jumps off. Why, you ask? Why has a man who can best be described as the personification of rage and bullheadedness seen fit to kill himself? What drove him to such drastic measures? Well, that's something we won't talk about just yet, because right as Kratos jumps off the Suicide Bluffs and plummets towards his death, the game cuts away to 3 weeks earlier. We find the Spartan on a ship sailing the Aegean Sea in the middle of a furious storm. Kratos has been given yet another task by the gods of Olympus. The seas of Poseidon are being terrorized by the gargantuan, multi-headed beast known as the Hydra, and Kratos has been tasked with dispatching this threat and restoring order to the seas. As fans of the series will know well enough, the Hydra serves as the very first and an absolutely excellent boss battle of the series. After a multi-legged clash against the creature, Kratos manages to kill the Hydra by impaling its head on the mast of a ship. While he has completed his task though, he soon learns that there's no time for respite. Kratos is contacted by the goddess Athena, who speaks to him once again through one of her statues, and she gives him one more task. This one more Herculean and daunting than any other he's ever faced. Or it would be daunting to someone who wasn't, Kratos. Athena informs Kratos that Ares, the god of war, his former master, has laid siege to her city, the city of Athens. Why? Well, remember how we spoke about Ares' plans to overthrow the Olympians and replace his father Zeus as the king of the gods? That was, after all, the reason he was once grooming Kratos to become his champion. He may not have found the champion he'd been looking for despite all his efforts, but Ares has finally put his plans into motion. By attacking the city of Athens, he has openly declared war on the gods of Olympus. Athena tasks Kratos with traveling to Athens and putting a stop to the attack. Kratos, of course, doesn't need an excuse to go up against the god of war. Vengeance and fury are what drive him more than anything else. And this seems like the perfect opportunity to strike down the god that destroyed his life. But on the other hand, after 10 years of servitude and unquestioning loyalty, Kratos has also grown tired of being the Olympians' very own pet slave. He tells Athena that he will do as he asks, but only if, upon the completion of this task, the gods rid him of the nightmares that haunt him, the nightmares of the day he killed his own family. Athena tells him that if he stops Ares, the gods will forgive his past sins. Needing no other promises of rewards and riches, Kratos promptly makes his way to Athens. Upon entering the city, as the Ghost of Sparta witnesses the ferocity and ruthlessness of the onslaught of Ares' minions, it quickly becomes clear that the god of war cannot be bested by any normal means. Ares himself has transformed into the size of a mountain, and as such is wreaking absolute havoc on the city. Soon, Kratos encounters a woman who is known as the Oracle of Athens, and she tells him just what he'll have to do to have a chance at defeating his former master. He'll have to acquire the powers of Pandora's box. Pandora's box is essentially an artifact of the gods themselves, holding great powers within, and it can even give mortals the power to kill a god. Kratos' objective then is to find Pandora's box, open it, and use the powers within to defeat Ares. And where is Pandora's box? It's resting within a structure known as Pandora's Temple. And where's the temple? Well, it's constructed on the back of Kronos, who was once the king of the Titans. After the Titans were defeated by Zeus and his fellow Olympians in the Great War, Kronos was banished and cursed to forever wander the place known as the Desert of the Lost Souls. To be able to defeat Ares, Kratos must travel to the desert, enter the temple, retrieve the box, and then make use of its powers. A large chunk of what follows sees the player, as Kratos, overcoming a number of challenges and tests in the form of puzzles and grueling battles. After many trials, and with the help of a mysterious figure known only as the Gravedigger, who's quite cryptically digging, well, graves, we'll speak more about him in a bit, Kratos manages to make his way into Pandora's temple, chained to the back of the Titan Kronos. Inside, he faces even more trials and challenges, designed by the temple's crazed and deranged architect, Pathos Verdes III, so that no one would be able to overcome them. The interiors of the temple and the trials Kratos comes up against act as a sort of mirror for the mind of Pathos Verdes. As the Ghost of Sparta ventures deeper and deeper into the heart of the structure, the tests he comes across continue to become progressively more brutal and harrowing. Starting off fairly simple, but devolving into nothing short of death traps, impaling spikes, and fearsome, mammoth, and twisted beasts. Ever since the construction of the temple, no one has ever managed to make it to Pandora's box as a result of these hurdles, which are all but impossible to overcome. Kratos, however, with his dogged determination and sheer force of brute force and will, manages to do the impossible, becoming the first person ever to successfully best the challenges of the temple. He finally makes it to Pandora's box, the artifact that will grant him the power to kill a god. But things are never easy for the Ghost of Sparta. As he begins opening the box, far away in Athens, Ares senses that Kratos has found the box. He picks up a massive pillar and throws it in the temple's direction. Propelled by his godly powers, the pillar flies even through the massive space separating Athens from the temple, and smashes into Kratos, pushing him back with an unstoppable force, tearing through him and pinning him to the wall behind him. Harpies, minions of the god of war, fly into the temple, grab hold of Pandora's box, and fly away with it, taking it to Ares. As Kratos watches on helplessly, bleeding out and severely injured, he soon succumbs to the massive blow that Ares has dealt him and dies. Don't be alarmed though, this may be the first time Kratos has ever perished in the God of War chronology, but it certainly won't be the last. Not by a long shot. After all, in the words of the Clown Prince of Gotham, this is what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. The Ghost of Sparta just doesn't know how to die. Neatly enough, there's an actual explanation for that as well, but let's not talk about that just yet. Kratos is sent to the underworld, where all dead souls are sent. But death and in turn defeat simply aren't an option for the Spartan. He manages to claw his way out of the realm of the dead and back into the land of the living, though not without help. He receives aid from the mysterious man known only as the Gravedigger. Remember him? We spoke about him earlier, so just who is this Gravedigger? Well, the series never comes outright and explicitly says it in as many words, but the implication is actually pretty clever. The Gravedigger is none other than Zeus, the king of Olympians, in disguise. So why exactly is Zeus helping Kratos in his quest to defeat Ares, his fellow Olympian, and more importantly, his own son? Well, there's several ways to answer that. The most obvious answer is, of course, that Ares is on the warpath, as is evidenced by his attack on the city of Athens, and the gods of Olympus have started growing fearful of his belligerence. Clearly, they feel that he needs to be stopped, which is why Athena tasked Kratos with doing so in the first place, and which is also why Zeus is making sure Kratos succeeds in his mission. There is, however, another reason, one that becomes apparent when you start reading between the lines. Remember the prediction made by the Sisters of Fate we spoke of in part 2 of this series? It's going to be pretty important as we move forward with this series, so here's a brief refresher. It was a prediction that just as Kronos had overthrown his father Uranus and Zeus defeated his father Kronos, the king of the Olympians too would be cast out and replaced by one of his own sons. That, incidentally, is exactly what Ares intends to do. Though God of War or any of its sequels never explicitly say this, it's probably safe to assume that this too must have been playing on his mind when he decided to bring Kratos back from the underworld. We'll be going into greater detail about that prediction and everything it entails as we move forward with the series, especially while talking about God of War 2 and 3 in future parts. But for now, let's move forward with the story at hand. The Ghost of Sparta may have been brought back from death, but he still has a massive mountain to climb, since Pandora's box now lies in the possession of Ares back in Athens. And so, there is clearly enough, only one course of action left for Kratos. He travels to Athens, and after a series of challenges, he manages to retrieve Pandora's box. He opens it up, and the power of the gods within is unleashed, released into the world. As such, Kratos acquires terrifying, ethereal powers. Powers that are said to be capable of destroying a god. He grows in size manifold, matching the gargantuan structure of Ares now. As Ares witnesses this, he realizes the gravity of the threat that faces him. He realizes that Kratos is no mere mortal, that the Spartan actually possesses the power to kill him. With Kratos now finally on an equal footing with his former master, the god of war himself, the two engage in a battle for the ages. Kratos fights against Ares with brutal ferocity, and soon it becomes clear to the god of war that this fight isn't necessarily one he's destined to win. In a desperate attempt to deter the Spartan, Ares decides to break Kratos' mind, to drive him to insanity so that he completely loses the will to fight. Kratos is transported into a dreamlike place, a recreation of that temple 10 years ago where he killed his wife and daughter and rose from their ashes as the ghost of Sparta. He is trapped by Ares in the illusion, faced with recreations of the family he killed, but Ares takes it one step further. He creates copies of Kratos, all of whom are hellbent on slaughtering the illusions of Lysandra and Calliope. Not a very subtle peek into Kratos' psyche, sure, but it definitely works from a dramatic and gameplay perspective. But the threat of insanity is a weapon that beings and gods have been using against Kratos for a long time, and he is not about to give in to it so easily. In the following leg of the climactic boss fight against Ares, Kratos battles to protect the phantoms of his wife and his daughter from rabid, rage-fueled copies of himself. A long, harrowing fight ensues, and Kratos fights with everything he has, and somehow he manages to hold all the copies of himself at bay. Frustrated by the Spartans' refusal to accept defeat, Ares takes away the very weapons that mark the moment Kratos sold his soul to the god of war. He rips off the blades of chaos that have been seared into his arms, leaving Kratos weaponless and defenseless, and then drives the blades through Lysandra and Calliope's illusions before Kratos' eyes. The trauma for him is of course too much to take, having had to relive what is without a doubt the most terrible moment of his tortured life. But while that is true, this accomplishes something else as well, something Ares did not expect. It breaks the illusion that entraps Kratos, freeing him from the clutches of the insane corners of his mind and hurtling his consciousness back into the real world. Without the blades of chaos to help him though, Kratos cannot hope to stand against Ares. It is at this moment that in the distance Kratos spots the Blade of the Gods. What is the Blade of the Gods? It's a gigantic metal sword that has been hidden in Athens for ages, disguised as an ornamental footbridge for the massive statue of Athena. Kratos pulls out the sword, and with a weapon in his hands once again jumps back into his duel with Ares with renewed vigor and, you guessed it, rage. Ares finally stumbled under the might of Kratos' wrath and falls to his knees, weak and defeated. Faced by his own imminent death, he makes a final, desperate plea to Kratos. "I was trying to make you a great warrior," the god of war tells him. Visions of his blades tearing through his family 10 years ago flash before Kratos' eyes. "You succeeded," he replies, and drives the Blade of the Gods into Ares' heart. After 10 years of service to Olympus, 10 years of harboring an insatiable hate and lust for revenge against Ares, the ghost of Sparta finally kills the god of war. But what Kratos wanted more than anything else, more than even vengeance on Ares, was a reprieve from the nightmares that have tortured him for 10 years. And as it turns out, that's not going to happen. The gods of Olympus, after all, are a tricky bunch, as Kratos has been warned time and time again by countless people, and they prove that once more. Athena tells Kratos that he has done well to defeat Ares, and as such he's no longer bound to the service of Olympus. She also tells him that the gods have forgiven his past sins. The nightmares that haunt him, though, cannot be taken away. Athena tells Kratos that the gods only ever promised to forgive his sins in exchange for his servitude. Betrayed and hopeless, Kratos realizes that there's no way out of this hellish existence, and he travels to the Suicide Bluffs, the highest point in all of Greece, with his mind set on what he must do next. And thus, God of War comes full circle, closing at the very juncture where it opened. Kratos stands on the edge of a cliff with one foot dangling over the edge and a look of complete and utter defeat showing on his face. He proclaims that the gods of Olympus have abandoned him, and believing death to be his only escape, a desperate and hopeless Kratos jumps off. But the ghost of Sparta cannot even die in peace. He plummets towards the sea and his death below, and soon after his body breaks the waves. But it doesn't prove to be as deadly as he had hoped. His fall is broken and he's magically lifted up through the air. He lands back on top of the suicide bluffs, and from the point where he jumped off, finds himself face to face with the goddess Athena. She tells Kratos that he has served the gods of Olympus well, and as such, though they cannot rid him of his nightmares, they still feel he should be rewarded. She explains that the throne of Ares and the mantle of the god of war now sits empty, and that the gods believe that he should be his successor. She opens up the portal leading to the throne, and Kratos steps through, becoming the god of war. Olympus's betrayal, though, still boils within him. And that's where we're going to end part 3. When we return, we will be talking about the events shown in the Ready at Dawn developed PSP game Ghost of Sparta.
And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from Gaming Bolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.